Hello and welcome to the last section of Chapter 32, The Politics of Boom and Bust from the American Pageant for U.S. History. We're looking at the hooked on the horn of plenty today through the good neighbor policy. So the depression is on, the stock market has crashed not once but twice, businesses laid people off, and so they're going to see the after effects of it today and how Hoover, a supposed genius, the man that they thought would probably the best man for the job, if there's going to be a crisis, we have the best president possible for this situation. So the Great Depression, as I like to call it, the happiest time in American history. I'm being facetious. It's hard to drum up and get excited about the Great Depression. Was the severe economic downturn for the 2 years of 31 and 32. The national output, the GDP, dropped 43%. The GDP of 1929 for the whole goods and services, everything produced in the United States, is 104 billion. By 1932, that had dropped to 59 billion. Substantial. A depression is when the economy actually shrinks and gets smaller. A recession, which the U.S. has gone through in recent times, usually with little or no growth. There's not been a depression in the U.S. economy since this time. 90,000 businesses go bankrupt. And so businesses go out of operation, people lose their jobs. So you get this unbalanced economy. Sales and production drops, wages are cut, people lose their jobs. When people lose their jobs, they spend less money, sales and production drops more wages are cut, people are fired. And it's just a downward spiral. Snowballs into a huge problem. This is one of the great photos from the Great Depression. Jobless men keep going. We can't take care of our own. People just wandering, looking for anything they can do for work, for food, you name it. You also have a credit crisis. Farmers, consumers, and investors defaulted on their loans. When they can't pay back their loans, banks don't make money. They don't actually just hold all their money at once. And so there's rumors that the banks are faltering, so people go down to the bank to withdraw their savings. If they got there in time, great, but when everybody shows up at the same time to withdraw their savings or their credit, not good, because then banks run out of money and then banks closed. If you didn't get there in time, you lost your life savings. There's no insurance back then. So there's these run on banks in 1931 where people are panicking and going to the banks. They withdraw their savings. There's more and more bank closings. By 1933, 11,000 of the nation's 25,000 banks failed. Pretty remarkable, actually. People lost everything. People that grew up in this era learned to not trust banks because their money was safer under a mattress and a coffee can. Because if you saved and scrimped and made sacrifices for years and then suddenly it's gone like that, that really causes problems. So one of the main causes of the Depression was overproduction of farms and factories. The nation's ability to produce goods had outrun its capacity to consume them and to pay for them. I mean, yeah, you can buy things on credit, but at some point you have to pay back unless you're the U.S. government. Overexpansion of credit also contributed to the Depression. It worsened the economic state of Europe, which had not fully recovered since World War I. It creates a climate where people are desperate for anyone to fix it, including fascists. Virtually all nations go off the gold standard. Even Britain, with the sterling pound, went off the gold standard. The gold standard means that for every U.S. dollar that was printed or a British pound, there was a pound of gold somewhere, a dollar's worth of gold. And so they went off the gold standard and just started printing money, which Germany found out it's not a good idea. Britain went off the gold standard on September 19th, 1931. We've never gone back on it. That's long gone. And so people started living in shanties and these groups of shacks called Hoovervilles after their president. Because, hey, I thought he was supposed to fix it, but apparently he didn't. There's a lot of Hoover jokes going on during the decade. Joblessness and poverty. Millions are out of work. The unemployment of 1929 is 3%. By 1932-33, that's 25%. That's across the board in the United States. Industrial cities are hit the worst. Some people didn't lose their jobs, but they got their pay cut in half. They had reduced hours, they had reduced wages, but that's better than losing your job and having zero income. There were long lines of hungry people waiting around for handouts from charities because back then the government didn't fix it. People didn't turn to the government. They've turned to private institutions like churches and other charities. People lived in shacks and shelters together. They were called Hoovervilles. Farmers have been struggling since the end of World War I. You have the Dust Bowl, the worst environmental disaster in the history of the United States. And then the psychological effects that, oh my gosh, the economy's not strong, we gotta save money. And it just changes your whole perspective on things. And so the whole country kind of just feels like they're down in the dumps. And a lot of people are, even though in some places the Depression kind of misses. This is a Hooverville in Seattle from 1934, actually. Kind of reminds me of where I grew up, trailer park. So here's Hoover. Right man for the job, right? He regarded as the most qualified person to ever be president. He was a genius. He thought this was temporary. He thought it was a normal boom and bust cycle. Maybe he's right, but that doesn't put food on the table or put a roof over somebody's head. He kept saying to the public that prosperity was just around the corner. He thought it was similar to the recession of 21. And so he takes the textbook economic ideas that you're supposed to do and tries them out. It doesn't work because he believed in laissez-faire economics. He truly, truly believed in his deep down to his core that if the government gave handouts to the people of America, it would kill what made America truly great, which was the work ethic of the United States, that drive to make yourself better. And maybe there was an element to truth of it, but people don't want hard lessons when they're starving. Industry, thrift, and self-reliance made America great. So he believed in voluntary measures, not government mandates. He urged businesses not to cut wages. He urged private charities to give out handouts, to provide relief. Hoover did decide towards the end to try to help out the railroads, the banks, and rural credit corporations as a job, so jobs would eventually trickle down along with money. Towards the end of his presidency, it's not working, so he does all these crazy things that are very brand new, and if you look at them from a really, analytical perspective, they're kind of like the New Deal in a very miniature version. This is a painting called the Home Relief Station by Louis Rubik, excuse me. So Hoover convinced Congress to allocate $2.25 billion for useful public works. So basically, hey, let's build a bunch of stuff. The government will pay for it, and the people will get to work. The most famous was the Boulder Dam on the Colorado River outside of what is now Las Vegas. Now it's renamed the Hoover Dam. Hoover opposed any projects, though he viewed socialistic, even though the government's owning and operating a power plant here. He vetoed a bill to build dams on the Tennessee River, which the government was going to sell electricity. He did start the Reconstruction Finance Corporation in 1932 with Congress. The RFC lent money to insurance corporations, to companies, banks, agricultural organizations. Basically, anyone that was going to falter because they're going to go out of business, the government would give them very low interest loans to stay in business. However, they're very stingy with their money. Everything's kind of risky at that time. People are really not doing well. And so the government was like, you're kind of a risk. We're not going to give you any money. And so they didn't give out their money as much as they should. They didn't give any loans out to individuals, so it didn't help the average American. Congress did pass the Norris LaGuardia Anti-Injunction Act, which outlawed anti-union contracts, barred federal courts from stopping strikes, boycotts, peaceful picketing. He tried a lot. None of it really works. The thing about him is he needed a PR guy. The guy needed a public relations guy. He tried so many things. He's so smart, but he didn't know how to talk and get the average American on his side. He didn't know how to speak directly to them, to make them feel confident that he was fighting for them. So he gave him a home loan bill here. Yes, indeed, I can sympathize with anybody who's about to lose his home and he's got this eviction threat because he's going to be voted out of office. Then you get this fiasco called the Bonus Army, the Bonus Expeditionary Force. The veterans of World War I, Congress had promised them a $1,000 bonus if they lived to 1945. Many veterans, hard on their luck, decided, hey, you know what? I could use that money right now. Really, that would really help me out instead of, 13 years down the road. So they want it now. So 20,000 veterans of World War I march on Washington to demand payment from Congress. Congress says no. They're like, we don't have the money. Sorry, when people aren't making money, they're not paying taxes either. If your income's zero, your tax rate is zero. 2,000 stayed in camp. Said, you know what? Most of them went home. The rest of them said, I got nothing else to do. I'm going to stay here till they pay me. The cops were sent in to try to break it up. Riots broke out to make them leave. And then somebody overreacted, well, Hoover did, and he calls in the army. So the sitting army is called in to remove the veterans of World War I. They bring in cavalry, they bring in guns, tear gas, and tanks are rolling down the streets of Washington, D.C. The guy that really overreacted, besides Hoover calling the army, is Douglas MacArthur. You also have George S. Patton and Dwight D. Eisenhower as a part of this. So you have the future heroes of World War II taking on the veterans of World War I. MacArthur ignored orders to stop, and it's a fiasco. I mean, the media gets a hold of this. The public can't believe that the government would attack its own veterans. who were asking for money. And so MacArthur, for his part, was shipped to the Philippines. Basically, he's almost banished from the United States for a long time, nearly over 20 years. In the melee, 2 were dead, many injured, but the public was shocked. The images really hurt the re-election bid of Herbert Hoover. When you see images like this, the government attacking its own men, when you see the fires in the Capitol in the background, you're not going to win re-election. Here's the bonus army in 32. We need cash down to Tombstone. Pay the bonus now. These guys are from Muncie, Indiana, actually. So just some facts, just to show you how bad the Depression was. 13 million people lost their jobs. In 32, 34 million people belonged to families that had no regular full-time wage earner. Maybe they had piecemeal work, maybe some part-time work, but 34 million people lived in a family that didn't have a regular job. Industrial production fell 45% between 29 and 32. Home building dropped 80% during those years. During the 20s, the U.S. banking system was worth $50 billion, which was half the GDP. 5,000 banks went out of business completely. 11,000 fail. From 29 to 33, the GDP fell 30%. The stock market lost 90% of its value. Unemployment, as we said, was 3%. 25% was the height in 1933. But if you take farmers out, all non-farm workers, 37% of Americans didn't have a job. In Cleveland, Ohio, the unemployment rate was 60%. In Toledo, Ohio, 80%. There was a Soviet, things were so bad here. There was a Soviet trading company in New York that averaged 350 applicants a day from Americans seeking work in the Soviet Union. Stalin was doing a series of 5-year plans to industrialize the Soviet Union to catch it up to the Western world, and they were paying handsomely, and they were treating Americans pretty well. And so 350 people a day were saying, you know what, it's so bad here, I should go work in the Soviet Union. 1 million farmers farm families lost their farms between 30 and 34. Corporate profits dropped from 10 billion to 1 billion. That's tremendous. From 29 to 32, the average American family income was reduced by 40%. 9 million savings accounts were wiped out. 273,000 families were evicted from their homes in 1932 alone. There's 2 million homeless people just roaming the country, place to place. 60% of our country was categorized as poor by the government in 1932. And then there's negative immigration. There was 279,000 immigrants who came to America in 1929. Only 23,000 came to the U.S. that year. In fact, more people immigrated from the United States than immigrated to it during the Great Depression. There was negative immigration. The U.S. government actually sponsored a Mexican repatriation program, which encouraged people to go back to Mexico. Places like Los Angeles and other communities in California and in the Southwest would buy one-way bus and train tickets. Over 400,000 Mexicans were repatriated to their country to try to open up jobs for people still in the United States. New York social workers reported that 25% of all children were malnourished. In the mining counties of West Virginia, Illinois, Kentucky, Pennsylvania, the kids that were not getting enough food to eat ranged around 90%. 9 out of every 10 kids were not getting enough food. Many people were becoming sick and ill with old diseases like tuberculosis. And the sad thing is that the U.S. population was 122 million, almost 123 million. 40% of that was under the age of 20. We have a very young population that goes through the Depression. And then you got some crazy stuff going on in Japan. It's just kind of thrown in here randomly, but we'll go over it real quick. World War II kind of officially starts in September 1931. The Japanese imperialists invade the Chinese province of Manchuria. The League of Nations doesn't do anything because the United States never joined, and they're busy with the Great Depression. So they're like, bad, Japan, we're mad at you. Secretary of State Henry L. Stimson issues the Stimson Doctrine, basically declared the United States would not recognize any territory acquired by force. Japan's really shaking in their boots now. Japan ignored the doctrine, moved into Shanghai in 1932. Here's the invasion of Manchuria in 1931. This is kind of the opening shots of World War II that largely ignored by the war. And here's the Japanese doing their thing, blowing a hole in the Nine Power Treaty, the Kellogg Pact, all the things they try to do with peace and prosperity. Hoover, though, tried to be nicer to Latin America, so he's got that going for us. He withdrew troops from Haiti and Nicaragua to be a good neighbor. His actions laid the groundwork for Roosevelt's good neighbor policy to become official in 1933 through World War II. That's all we have. We're going to have to figure out how they're going to fix this Great Depression. It's going to take a new president, and then it's going to take a really, really big war to pull the United States out. I hope you enjoyed this. Let me know if you have any questions.